Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today. Hope you're all doing absolutely excellent. Today, we're sitting down once more to talk about Bethesda. However, this angle is a little bit different because the dust has settled a bit since Oblivion Remastered has released. It was a very exciting launch. There was one video I made, though, in that launch week talking about how there were some issues. And out of all the videos I've posted on Oblivion Remastered since it first leaked, that was our most disliked one. People did not like me raining on the parade a little bit there. And I get it. That's usually not my style. So I do what I usually do. I backed up a little bit. I was like, all right, we'll wait for people to settle. And Digital Foundry put out a very interesting video highlighting major issues on consoles for Oblivion. Now, as someone who's covered Bethesda for a very long time, adamantly so, there is a new sort of approach to their content in the last year that I'm not a fan of. It's something I actually was DMing Juicehead about a few weeks ago when we were talking about the Fallout 4 next-gen update. Bethesda has adopted a sort of approach of just release it and move on. And they're not giving themselves either enough time or budget or resources or what have you to fix up some of the messes that they create. Because we're not just looking at Oblivion Remastered and assessing some of the issues with that game, but we're also looking at Fallout 4's next-gen update and even Starfield. Again, this is all across like the last year where Bethesda has made problems for themselves. And in some cases, like there's one instance I'll highlight with Starfield where they did go ahead and fix that and make a bit of a change. At the same time, though, there are other problems with the game that are now popping up that Bethesda is still kind of like not really saying much on. And that's been the case for a lot of their releases over the last year. And it feels a little bit like they're leaning into the launch hype to cover up problems with the game because people are just excited to get that thing. And in the case of Oblivion Remastered, what I will be visiting as a topic, and I know 2020 hindsight, but the shadow drop was amazing. It was exciting, but there was no real timetable outside of just knowing we had the Oblivion Remaster over on the FTC documents that leaked. But otherwise, I don't see a reason why Bethesda and Virtuos couldn't have held on to this for just a little bit longer, even a few months, to get a couple of patches into it, get it fixed up so that it's not having the sort of poor performance issues it's having right now out the gate. So we're going to talk about all of that, ladies and gentlemen. If you're new here and you're into what's going on with Bethesda, you're in the right place. Do consider subscribing. Let's open up with Oblivion Remastered because that is the most relevant. It's still just a few weeks out now. And we know that Virtuos is collecting feedback for what they can do to help the game out, not just in the terms of like, hey, performance fixes, but it seems they're even considering like content and feature addition. So we'll see what that ends up being. Of course, that's very exciting, but I think they need to just patch up the general framework of the game so it's stable. But Digital Foundry did a very extensive breakdown on Oblivion Remastered for consoles. And this was something that I warned people about heading into the release of Oblivion Remastered, when the rumor was that it was going to be this hybrid between Unreal Engine 5 and Bethesda Game Studios jank. And the way that games are made on Unreal Engine 5, again, I don't really fully blame the engine, but rather how developers approach it, that I think that was going to be a problem from the get-go, and I warned people about that. I was like, this doesn't sound like a pretty happy marriage that's about to be made here. But nonetheless, we see the results of it. Digital Foundry puts out a video, and they break down a couple of things that I thought were worth pointing out to more of you out there. One of them is that on consoles, it doesn't matter where you play. It could be base PS5, PS5 Pro, it could be Series X and S. It doesn't matter where. The more you play, the worse this thing gets. As you log more time into the game, your frame rate gets worse, and even reloading saves is going to result in crashes. And this is something that I've been playing on PC, but I've had a lot of issues with Oblivion Remastered, is just the stability of it all. Is I'm entering new areas or engaging in combat and it crashes multiple times. It's part of the reason that my review, if you will, for the game has taken some time, because I'm like, man, I'm sort of holding out for a patch at this point, because it's just like I keep having my fun times interrupted. But one thing they did note in the review over on Digital Foundry was that, you know, this isn't going to be consistent for everyone just because it depends on how much time you're playing per session. Still, the reality is that there is a pretty concerning performance issue here tied to your play clock. And that these hitches that we're all experiencing, whether you're on PC or console, are experienced primarily in the open world. And even if you want to use the PS5 Pro as like the de facto powerful console, it's dropping below 30 FPS with some of those hitches. So like power matters very little here. You could have a beefy rig. As I talked about, like when I was trying to play this thing on Ultra, I have a really strong rig. Doesn't matter. The thing just starts stuttering like mad. This game needs some serious performance improvements I think, to stabilize itself on the market. It's great, it's done well. The launch is really exciting, as I talked about in a previous video. Like, I think gaming needed that combined with Clair Obscur to be reminded, like, hey, $50 games can still happen, and they're still going to be excellent. I think Oblivion Remastered challenges the norms in a lot of ways where it makes what's happening here a little bit understandable. But the reason I want to kind of be on Bethesda's ass a bit when this sort of stuff is happening is because we know they're going to do more remasters. Even if the FTC leak didn't show Fallout 3 Remaster, you look at the money that they're making off of Oblivion, it's like they're going to do more. It's just such an obvious business tactic there. It's good for Microsoft, good for Xbox, good for Bethesda. It's easy money. So if they're going to keep doing this and they're going to keep using this style, they need to make sure the next one, if they plan to shadow drop it especially, is a lot more stable. And if that means, as much as I know we all get eager, and it's easy to say now in this kind of moment of like, all right, we need to fix this. But as eager as we get, and I know Bethesda gets eager, like they want to make us excited. It results in more money, but it's also fun for them. Look, at the end of the day, this sort of stuff cannot continue to happen because it's one thing if it's a one-off. That's me kind of being a hard ass in this instance. But as someone who's extensively covered their stuff, yeah, this last year has been a little rough for the release of anything new, whether it be a next-gen update or a full-on release for Bethesda Game Studios. And not just in like quality and how you feel about the game. I'm just talking about like the actual stability of things. So let's shift topics a little bit here and look at Fallout 4's next-gen update, specifically on PC. It's a little bit of a reverse situation from what's happening with Oblivion Remastered, where Oblivion Remastered is having a lot of issues on consoles and PCs are a little more hit or miss, whereas Fallout 4's next-gen update is pretty good on consoles. Like, console players have not had many issues to report, all things considered, outside of like that initial launch window where you'd use like those Creation Club weapons and they just shoot out red exclamation points. We all had that, but otherwise it was on PC that it got significantly worse. And I'm not talking from the like modder friendly perspective. Of course, you know, with Skyrim, we've been through this multiple times with all the new SKUs of Skyrim. Modders had to update ancient archive mods if they were still around working on them to make sure they were compatible with these new versions of Skyrim. So this was already expected when they announced the Fallout 4 next-gen update, but I think the biggest problem with Fallout 4's next-gen update is it's nuked PCs so bad that, as I showed in my videos, the load times are awful. It doesn't really look much better. It crashes a lot more. It stutters a lot more. Like, it's really bad on PC. And what's really interesting about all of this is that one of the most popular mods for Fallout 4 now is a rollback mod that puts you at the older version of Fallout 4, which is much more stable. And we're talking about a game that was like, how old at the top of last year? We're talking like 9 years old, Fallout 4 was. And it comes around, and again, I feel old. We talked about it earlier this year. You know, Fallout 4 is going to be 10 years old this year. But this is a game that is going to be 10 years old and it's running worse than it ever has. And look, I admit and understand that like I am more patient than I think the average consumer is. Maybe sometimes I'm a little too patient. I can admit that about myself. But I really don't think it's one of those, oh, sorry, mistakes happen or shit happens when you break a version of your own game and then pretty swiftly abandon it. Like, again, Fallout 4 on PC is still pretty horrendous in comparison to where it once was, which, you know, it's Bethesda Game Studios game on PC, so it has its issues, but it was definitely more stable. And so I just think when you introduce that problem, you have to be considerate of the community, because a lot of people play your games for the mods. Like, it's not even about the vanilla content. It's like people like Fallout 4 mods, and when you bring in a new patch, you're creating work not just for yourselves, of course, but you're creating work for your entire community. And when you're not making it worthwhile and then not fixing that issue, that's where it becomes a problem. And I could just see a world where Bethesda does like another big patch for the 10-year anniversary of Fallout 4 this year and hopefully fixes some of the problems they have here, but also adds like more little celebratory content. Again, we have the Fallout Day stream this year, so I could see between the 10th anniversary of Fallout 4, Season 2 dropping at the end of this year, there's a lot of things that could be happening in the Fallout franchise that could synchronize pretty well. So I imagine we'll go the full stretch of this year without hearing any kind of fixes about Fallout 4 on PC. But this is, to me, one of the most under-discussed components. Like, I do think sometimes Bethesda gets to smoke in areas where I'm like, I don't really get it, or I didn't experience that, but I don't disrespect that people have their own experiences and they want to express those. But this is one of those things where I'm like, if we're going to complain about anything about Bethesda, I feel like this is one of them. Like the next-gen update for Fallout 4 just being abandoned after breaking the experience for a lot of people. And like, that's where I play Fallout 4 the most. I play it on PC. I have like 400 hours on PC. You know, I have my Platinum Trophy run on PlayStation 4, so that's done with. I have my console mods run that was on my Xbox. It's really my PC where I do most of my playing for Fallout 4. And I don't do that as much anymore. I used to play Fallout 4 pretty often, but I haven't touched it since the next gen update, which I think should have been a bit of the opposite. So rambling a bit at this point, but yeah, I just, again, this is where I start to mount it a bit of like, there's a consistent pattern here. And then the last part is a bit of a double-edged sword. We're going to talk a bit about Starfield. So Starfield, one of the problems out the gate for that game was when they brought creations in. I saw the vision Bethesda was going for, which is like they've done before, like let's let the community support our game, but we're going to do so in a more official way. Now, they had some speed bumps like, hey, these are shutting off achievements, so I don't want to mess with these. They made things more achievement friendly. But really at the heart of the issue for people with creations was pricing, as it's always been since they introduced this back in like 2017, 2018. And Starfield was the worst it had been in that case because Bethesda was selling a $7 quest called The Vulture, which was 20 minutes long. And then the free quest they gave out in June announcing all of this stuff was like an hour long. And it just didn't make sense. It wasn't consistent. It was something I asked Todd Howard about in our interview, and he did say they were going to make changes. And so this is the first time I dove into creations to just look at prices and quests, and I didn't admittedly play all of these, but I haven't found anything above 500 credits. It's really rare. Like I saw one quest that was 600, but otherwise all of the quest creations under verified creators or anything from Bethesda Game Studios has arrived at under that price tag from The Vulture. So they did make that adjustment there, which I think is good to see. I think that is an improvement, and that is something that, you know, you'd expect out the gate, but at least they are listening and reacting in certain cases. But what's happening is Starfield has been iced so hard in this last kind of stretch since October that even prominent modders are abandoning, I think, core mods that Bethesda Game Studios, whether they know it or not, rely on. And we know that Bethesda said at the top of this year that the reason they're being quiet is they got a lot they're working on. I'll believe it when I see it. Like, I think part of that is going to be the PS5 port for Starfield. We know there's at least a year 2 expansion coming for Starfield this year. I don't know what they're going to do with it because my theory is like you got to try to do what Shattered Space did, but just better, because I think that's the only way Starfield crawls back into the conversation, that or just a complete overhaul of the core game. But I don't get any indication that Bethesda could do that in just like a few months of work. But there's just a lot of ways they could take Starfield, but the hope has waned for most people when you look at the player count of Starfield compared to really any Bethesda Game Studios game. It's just not close. And I think Starfield can get there, but they need to be more active in its support and the communication about what's going on, and if they're actually going to make some fixes, because, for example, there is an unofficial Starfield patch mod that now GamesRadar is covering, saying in a post on the Starfield modding Discord, Starfield community patch modder Picky Source sends a message to players who had noticed the mod hadn't been updated since last September. The user announces that the team is looking for modders who want to take the reins from them, as the current creators don't have the time or motivation to curate the patch anymore. While Picky Source personally puts his absence down to a new puppy, which has reduced his gaming time, and certainly I can relate to that, the modders explain other members of the team have found themselves disenchanted with the game for various reasons: lack of replayability, the paid modding situation, moved on to playing new games, etc. Although they aren't working on the mod, Picky Source says they are still going to maintain the website, but admits if nobody comes forward, we may have to retire the project and direct users to Arth Moore's patch going forward, in reference to the unofficial Starfield patch. This is significant in my eyes because this is something that happened out the gate. There were modders who just looked at what Starfield was offering and said that it can't support what we want to do with the product, and so they moved on. Now you have the modders who did hang with it, and there's not that excitement, there's not that hype, that drive, but more importantly, the engine that makes these modders tick: passion. It is a currency in this industry, whether big publishers, developers want to admit it or not. Passion is a huge part of it all, and Starfield does have a lacking. It's almost too sanitized. It's funny because Bethesda made Starfield like one of their most polished games, and I feel like when you play Oblivion Remastered, you kind of learn why that was a bit of a mistake. Not that you want buggy games, but there is that level of jank that and just dynamism that the gameplay loop provides that makes them so much more enjoyable and reactive, and you want that from their games. And so I think a lot of us were looking at Starfield Shattered Space to be, as I've talked about many times before, that Phantom Liberty moment. when it was the complete opposite and was rather like a nail in the coffin for many of us. Like, I haven't touched Starfield since, and I cover Bethesda games really extensively. I can only imagine for the common consumer, where there's tons of great games coming out in 2025, like how unappealing Starfield is. And especially when Bethesda gives you an option of like, that's the Bethesda I love and remember, like many of us with Oblivion Remastered, it just kind of solidifies the opinion we have. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Bethesda moves with Starfield. It's one of my big question marks that people ask me a lot about. And it's like, I don't really think I have a great answer for it, because it is in one of those precarious positions where if you're going to commit to year 2's expansion, you got to try again and just see how it goes. But if it doesn't work out, like, I wouldn't blame Bethesda for just saying, okay, Elder Scrolls 6, and just putting the manpower and the resources over there. And we'll see how it all turns out. But overall, this video is just kind of like Bethesda needing to generally do better. And I feel comfortable saying that just because I think I've patted them on the back when they have done really well. And this is one of those kind of slap on the wrist moments where you just look at like the last year, and it's like, you guys can't just keep releasing and abandoning. Even if you are working quietly on things, this is where I've talked a lot about Bethesda, their communication. It goes a long way. I understand something like Oblivion Remastered, it just released. It's a little bit of like a bang play, and they're probably figuring things out on the fly. This goes back to like the shadow drop and less of a planned release, and sort of like you ask for it when you do that. But obviously Fallout 4 being the most egregious in this pocket here, where that is the true like release and move on and we'll figure it out later. Nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think about what's going on with Bethesda Game Studios across these 3 examples I shared? I really hope they just start taking care of business here and don't put Elder Scrolls 6 in a similar position. I think what I'm starting to notice, which I didn't before with Bethesda Game Studios, is based on how they talk about their games and their releases, is like excitement is everything to them. And I think they'll even sacrifice the quality of their product to just create that buzz that feels good. And I get it, there's a human element to it, but I don't think it would have hurt in the case of Oblivion Remastered to like, remember when the leaked release window was June? I don't think it would have hurt to be like, yeah, we're going to just, you know, drop it then instead and at least give it a couple more months. Because I imagine a patch within this month will happen, and we'll see how significant that is. And if it creates more issues or just plugs them all up, game development is finicky like that. So you can't really guarantee it's just going to be like a complete lock on fixing the game. But we'll see what they fix before the originally rumored release window, and if it would have been a good idea to just wait until then and maybe do something during the Xbox game showcase. But that's why, again, I feel like with the shadow drop and everything, I'm like, they must have had other plans for the showcase. Like, this is when we're going to show off what's happening with Starfield, or do they drop another Elder Scrolls 6 trailer? Who knows? We'll see. But ladies and gentlemen, that's all I've got for you today. Let me know your thoughts down below. Take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.